All right, we are back here getting ready for the U.S. Open, which is coming to Flushing Meadow next week for 2 week tournament here. Excited to preview it again with a great friend of the podcast, tennis writer Chris Oddo is here. Chris, welcome. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me again.
Thanks for coming on here. I got to say, I'm definitely in the tennis mood here, especially after what we saw this past weekend over in Cincinnati with the epic final between Novak Djokovic and Carlos Alcaraz. Like that tournament alone, I think can get a lot of people excited for this event.
Yeah, I mean that was exactly what we needed to see before the U.S. Open, right? Just a perfect, enticing preview of what we might see in a couple of weeks in Flushing Meadows.
Yeah, what was your big takeaway from that match with the Djokovic Alcaraz match?
You know, I was pleasantly surprised at how evenly matched they have become. It's like they're at the perfect point in this rivalry, which is only 4 matches deep so far. Alcaraz won their first meeting last year, kind of by surprise, and on the clay in Madrid. And then we waited for a long time for their next matchups, not knowing what they would be like. Of course, everybody thinking Djokovic is on his way to the calendar year Grand Slam ahead of the Wimbledon final. And that was their second meeting of the season. And Alcaraz won that match. And that just really flipped the script on what's possible with this rivalry. Of course, they met a couple of weeks before that at Roland Garros. It was a very disappointing effort for Alcaraz, where they matched up great for the first 2 sets. He was absolutely incredible and setting up for a fantastic finish. And then cramping got in the way of Alcaraz, and he lost that match. He just really had nothing left for sets 3 and 4. So we wondered what's going to happen next. And we got what happened next at Wimbledon. It was incredible. And then this rematch at Cincinnati definitely wet our whistle, our collective whistle, right, for what could happen in New York. I mean, that was just a fantastic match, kind of surprisingly good for a Masters 1000 final. And even Djokovic said it himself. It's one of the best matches he ever played and compared it to other Grand Slam finals and matches like that. So it just, I mean, now it's just exciting and everybody's clamoring and dying to see if they'll meet again in the final. Of course, no guarantees, but it does look pretty likely.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you talk about the Wimbledon Cincinnati. We split it now. Like, we'll be only so lucky we can get the rematch here, whether it's in the final or a semifinal. Like, again, we're recording before the draw comes out, so you don't know what side they're going to end up being placed on. Hopefully, they end up on the opposite sides and meet in the final.
Well, they're 1 and 2 seeds, so they're going to be opposite sides. We're good there.
Yeah,
that's taken care of. So the rest is up to them to each get through 6 rounds and meet again. And I just have to say about this rivalry, what I think is amazing about it right now is that they're just at this opposite end of the spectrum. Of course, Djokovic, 36-year-old, who knows how many more years he'll have left of winning slams, but, you know, he's at the back end of his career. He's still playing pretty much peak tennis. He's had an incredible season. And then Alcaraz has come along so swiftly, still just 20 years of old, breaking all these age-related records, and he's just become a force, already has 2 Grand Slams. And that's probably the surprising part of it, is that how quickly Alcaraz has come along and also separated himself from the other young talented players in the field, where he sort of stands alone. And it's a question now of how long can Djokovic keep up this peak tennis level to compete and defeat Alcaraz before he's too old to do it anymore. Maybe 1 year, maybe he hits the wall this year at the U.S. Open. We don't know, but it's very fascinating, and I think tennis fans can be very blessed. And another point I wanted to make is how much love the tennis community and fans of the sport in general have for Alcaraz. He's really a captivating young talent, charismatic. So he has sort of stepped in for the absence of Nadal, Federer retiring, Serena gone from the game. Carlos has been a really bright spot for this young generation, and I think he's bringing in new fans.
He certainly is. Speaking of new fans, last year tennis really had a moment at the U.S. Open because obviously we had the Serena stuff. We got a bunch of great matches at Arthur Ashe on late night sessions here. We had the Breakpoint series on Netflix here really got more attention on the sport here. Like, how do you think the buzz that we built over the course of this past year that got parlay into fan interest in this tournament?
I think Netflix helps. I think it was, a fun way for a lot of fans that maybe didn't know the players to kind of get into their lives and what it's like playing on the tour, both on and off the court. And I think it gave people a great idea of what the pressure's like and how difficult it is for these players with issues of mental health and just, tennis is a sport where you kind of fail and you're all by yourself when you do fail. So I think those episodes are captivating, but I also think that tennis just marches on no matter what happens. I think personally, and I think a lot of my colleagues in the tennis media thought that we might hit a real rough spot when the big three and Serena aged out of the sport. But we've kind of seen that almost happen already. And the excitement never dies. The new generation picks up. Carlos Alcaraz is here. Iga Swiatek is here. So I don't think there's a lot to worry about. I think when you talk about these Grand Slam events, there's always going to be excitement. It can ebb and flow a bit, but it's always going to be there. And I think that's the beauty of the sport, that people will always be attracted to it. And there'll always be young players ready to step up and captivate us.
Yeah, I did love the Breakpoint series. The one moment I still remember from that show very well is I think it was the French Open final between Casper Ruud and Rafael Nadal, and they're in the tunnel. You see Rafael Nadal just like doing his little warm-ups, running back and forth while Ruud's trying to focus. Like that kind of stuff you don't see is very cool.
Yeah. Some of the behind-the-scenes stuff. Yeah, if anybody hasn't seen it yet, I would definitely want to take a peek at that. They've done a great job with it, and I look forward to more episodes, another season of that, which will be really exciting. For me, it's not always that exciting knowing the outcome of the event. Like, for instance, I watched the Tour de France on Netflix, the episode on the series on that, and I had no idea what was going on. And I said, wow, I wish I could be this way with tennis, but it'll never happen. We always know who's going to win, right?
Yeah, that's for sure here. And I do love the fact also, like last year, like we were talking about this with some of my friends, like we're not big into tennis, like especially like the matches were exploding. People were talking about tennis on Twitter a lot, which I had not seen prior to last year's tournament, which I think is a very nice sign for the health of the sport.
You're talking about the U.S. Open last year?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a cool event. I think that the way that Serena in her career has transcended the sport, it just took that U.S. Open to another level. All eyes were on her, especially in the United States, and the media machine was just rolling, and it was like, yeah, and I think that trickled down to where it made the whole tournament pretty exciting. And then, of course, you had what Alcaraz did, becoming the youngest champion in history. So amazing beginning and middle with Serena, and then the ending with Carlos that pointed to the future. I think it was a pretty cool tournament.
Yeah, let's start with let's go to the women's side for a minute here. Obviously, you talk about Iga Swiatek a little bit here. She's the reigning champion here. She's become the number one player here. Like, what are your odds you feel like she can repeat?
I think she's right there. What I do think is interesting with Iga this year is that last year there was a little bit of an aura of invincibility. She was virtually unbeatable through the middle of the season. She went on a 37-match winning streak that took her all the way to her loss at Wimbledon, and I think that carried over. And she won the U.S. Open for the first time, dominated the hard courts as well. This year, she hasn't been as fortunate. I think she's been challenged by players like Aryna Sabalenka, Elena Rybakina, and you can just look at her record against the top 10. She was 15-2 last year. This year, only 6-6. She's had her share of struggles against Rybakina, who she's 0-3 against. She lost to Coco Gauff in Cincinnati. She lost to Pegula recently. So there are a few more losses and a few more like chinks in the armor of Iga. I'd still call her the slight favorite, but I think really there are a handful of names that can challenge her, and I would not be surprised at all if she doesn't successfully defend this title. I wouldn't be that surprised if she wins it, though. I think she's a great champion, and I think she's going to win plenty more Grand Slams. But I just think it's a tighter field, and it's going to be a tougher ask this year than it was last year.
Yeah, I'm excited to see how that plays out here, especially you mentioned some of the top young women for the next American generation of tennis there. I mean, talk about Coco Gauff. She won in Cincinnati. She's done well here before. Jessica Pegula. Like, of this crop of American women, like, who do you feel like has the best chance to make a deep run here?
Well, those two names you mentioned are the ones that I think are pretty set up to at least get to the quarterfinals. Jessica Pegula has been missed consistency for the last two seasons. She's always making quarterfinals of slams. She hasn't had that breakthrough yet, though she did recently win the title at Montreal, which was very impressive. I think that her Grand Slam breakthrough may very well come at this one. And I think Coco's the big story right now because she was really down in the dumps a bit after Wimbledon, lost in the first round to fellow American Sophia Kenin, and was having some struggles with her game. Just really was not really firing on the forehand and not really confident overall. But since she's brought on a new coach by the name of Per Reba and also brought on Brad Gilbert as a consultant, she's changed her game. She's changed her confidence level. She's changed her mindset. She's become a little bit more aggressive, and she's just playing so confident, winning 11 of her last 12 and winning that huge title in Cincinnati. A lot of people are thinking she can win the title at the U.S. Open. I myself am not so sure, but I think definitely a career best performance for Goff. She's never been beyond the quarterfinals. I would say she's got a good chance to do that. And then there are always a handful of other Americans that are great to watch. Madison Keys, Sloane Stephens, young Alicia Parks, Peyton Stearns, an NCAA champion, is starting to make her way on tour. So a lot of young Americans to look at as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously there are plenty of big names on the women's side as well. There's the historical names like Venus Williams going out here, getting a wild card, come back in again. Caroline Wozniacki in the comeback. That's stuff to watch here. Like, who are some of the other names that people should be aware of on the women's side that you want to keep an eye on this tournament?
Well, I think you got to start with Iga. She's the world number one, and she's the defending champion. And the Polish fans in Flushing Meadows will let you know where she's at because you'll hear them cheering for her. There's a big Polish contingent in New York. It's pretty awesome. But Sabalenka is another one, the world number two. She won the Australian Open title, her maiden Grand Slam title this year. She's playing great tennis. And Rybakina, a few health issues this summer, but also playing great tennis, has won some really big titles this year, reached the Australian Open final, won the Indian Wells title on hard court, and won the title in Rome. I think she could be a potential winner of this tournament. Coco Gauff's going to be in the mix. Ons Jabeur of Tunisia, who was a finalist last year. You got Pegula. You also have Marketa Vondrousova from the Czech Republic, who's the Wimbledon champion. Has played only 2 events since winning Wimbledon. It'll be interesting to see how she holds up her end of the bargain. Lots of good players. Just glance down the top 10 of the WTA, and I think all of them have a fairly good chance to make a deep run.
Yeah, for anybody who watched Breakpoint, Ons Jabeur is somebody you're going to love rooting for if you get a chance to find one of her matches.
Oh, yeah, she's incredible. Hasn't played as well maybe this year due to some injuries, but did reach the Wimbledon final. And I think by doing so has proven that she is definitely one of the top 5 players in the world and still has that Grand Slam title in the works. I don't know if she'll ever get it, but she definitely has the game to do it.
Absolutely here. Let's get to the men's side now. Let's go back to Carlos Alcaraz for a minute here because obviously he's the reigning champion here, but obviously he would consider the favorite here, but like you look at the history of this tournament in the last like 15 years, I guess since Rogers 5P, there's been a lot of turnover in the champions here. Like, what do you think Alcaraz's odds are of repeating? I feel like fluky stuff usually happens in this major for the men's side.
You know, I think that Alcaraz and Djokovic have separated themselves from the rest of the field a little bit, and that will increase their odds. I feel like Carlos has done nothing but impress me this season. He's 53-6. He's got 6 titles. I mean, pretty incredible when you think that it was just last year that he was winning the U.S. Open. That was his first major title. That was his first stint at number 1. And now, 9 months later, we've seen a full season of Novak Djokovic, and we still see Alcaraz hanging on to the number 1 record and coming in here as the number 1 seed. I think he has a pretty good shot to win it. What's amazing about this kid is he seems to get better every week. He's young and developing. He's already so good, but he's still getting better. There are elements of his game that can improve, and I think he's going to be right there with a fairly decent shot to win it. He's great on the hard courts. He loves playing in New York. That's pretty clear. So, I mean, barring injury, I think he's co-favorite with Djokovic at this point.
Yeah, speaking of Djokovic here, one thing I noticed with him also is that he has not had the best luck here over the long term. I mean, he's lost the final 5 times. He's only won it 3 times. Most recently, 5 years ago, he lost here 2021 trying to go for the Grand Slam here. Why do you think Novak has not had as much luck in New York compared to Australia, which is both hardcore slams?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I mean, I guess you could say maybe it's because it's at the end of a long season. He's always put so much priority on all the events, and by the time we get to August, there's a little wear and tear, a little bit of physical element. Maybe that explains why he didn't have enough gas in the tank to get past Medvedev in 2021, where he was trying to win the calendar year Grand Slam. I mean, he won his first 27 matches at the Grand Slam that year and just ran out of gas, and I think that's what you can put that one down to. Of course, he was disqualified in 2020. That was tough. A lot of people think he was really in line to win that title. He was clearly the favorite before that happened. He didn't play last year, which is, again, difficult. And, you can get political and talk about the reasons he wasn't allowed in the country. But again, he might have been the favorite had he come last year. He would have been the favorite, and he could have very likely spoiled Alcaraz's party. Some of those other losses in the finals, yeah, disappointing, but you have to look at the fact that he's 81-13 lifetime at the U.S. Open. He does have the 3 titles, and he's been to the final 9 times in 16 appearances, so it's not like he's having trouble playing well in New York. he just maybe doesn't have that extra gas in the tank to get over the hump in some of these seasons. And let's face it, there's been a lot of good competition. Rafael Nadal has been a great hardcourt player, and he really played his best tennis at the U.S. Open compared to where in Australia he wasn't really a factor in many of those years. And of course, he had Federer giving him trouble, and then he ran into the steamroller, also known as the Stanimal, in the 2016 final. So yeah, I mean, it is strange. I'll definitely agree with you, Mike, that 3 titles is not a lot compared to 10 in Australia. But I still think he's played pretty well, just hasn't gotten the breaks, and probably, like I said, ran out of gas a few times. But I think number 4 could be coming this year. That's what my gut tells me.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting for sure with him, because obviously you mentioned he's trying to keep up with Alcaraz now, and like he's at the point now, I think, where he is always a guy who prides himself on his fitness, and he's able to play like all these big tournaments here. You wonder if he starts to, after seeing especially how like Roger and Rafa had ended their career sort of marred by injury, maybe he starts to scale back a little bit, tries to point himself more towards getting those majors, to put himself atop the all-time leaderboard more further than like he might be if he just goes full out again.
Yeah, I think he's really trying to be careful and trying to peak, only for these Grand Slams right now. I think that's a really smart plan. He knows how to do it better than anyone else. 23-time Grand Slam champion on the men's side. So I think that's what he's thinking about right now. And I think a lot of what's going to happen in the next 2 weeks in terms of how much gas in the tank Novak will have if and when he gets to the semis and the finals is going to be a lot about the draw, and if he's able to navigate those early 3 or 4 rounds in straight sets without using too much energy. That's going to be important for him this year.
Yeah, sure. I think a big talking point on the broadcast this year, I'm sure, will be the fact that we've gone 20 years on American men winning since Andy Roddick back in 2003, but we do have some big contenders coming through. Obviously, Francis Tiafoe's big run last year, he gets to the semis and loses to Alcaraz. Christopher Eubanks makes the big run in Wimbledon. Like, who are some of the American men you're watching for in this tournament besides those 2?
Tommy Paul has been looking great. Paul has defeated Alcaraz in Canada. It was such an incredible match. It was his 2nd consecutive win over Alcaraz. And when you watch Tommy Paul and you see the athleticism that he has in this kind of all-around game, he's got great court coverage. He's got quite a bit of power and pop. Kind of a perfect player, and I think he's still improving and still kind of maybe a little bit of a late bloomer in terms of if you compare him to a guy like Alcaraz, but really talented, and I think hasn't broken the top 10 yet, but is on the cusp of that, and I think he has the potential to do big things at the U.S. Open, and I think the fans will really get behind him if he does. Of course, I'm watching Francis, and I'm really keeping an eye on Taylor Fritz as well. He's still the leader and the top-ranked American at number 9 in the world. He's really set the example for the American men over the last couple seasons, winning the Indian Wells title, taking out some of the biggest names in the sport like Rafael Nadal. But he has struggled at the slams a little bit more than we expected. This year he gets a chance to make amends for losing in the first round last year at the U.S. Open. It would be really nice for Taylor if he can, get his game together and perform well there. You mentioned Eubanks, very fun player. Sebastian Korda is a guy who's got off to such a great start this year in Australia, and then injuries crept in and he hasn't been able to find his game since then. But I think a lot of people were targeting him to be the best American in the not too distant future. It's just that injuries have gotten in the way, and it's really unclear what his upside is. But he is probably the guy with the most potential upside. Now, there's a total different question of if he's going to turn that into to true results on tour. But a lot of people think he has the game to be a slam champion and be maybe a top 5 player. Then you've got guys like Mackie McDonald, Michael Moe, J.J. Wolf, just really entertaining guys who are hard-nosed and maybe will never be top 10 players, but awesome talents and awesome workers and great for fans in New York to get behind, especially during the first weekend of the major.
Yeah, absolutely here. And obviously, we're pretty confident that Alcaraz and Djokovic are going to make the semifinals at least if everything goes well for them. But, there are a lot of big names up and down the draw that I feel like you could easily talk yourself into this guy can get to the semifinals if everything goes right. Who are some of those players you're watching on the men's side?
Oh, we haven't talked about Daniil Medvedev, the 2021 champion, really has great history in New York. He's also a finalist in 2019, lost to Nadal in a 5-set final. Having a great year as well, 49-11 on the season with 5 titles, has tailed off a bit of late, and maybe that's why we're not really talking about him, because he didn't do too much damage in the last 2 events. But Medvedev is a player who can do some damage. Yannick Sinner, the guy who held a match point against Alcaraz last year in the quarterfinals is another player we're expecting big things from. Holger Rune, recently anointed member of the top 5. You know, the other 20-year-old, the 20-year-old that's really promising, but he's not named Alcaraz, and he hasn't been able to play well against Alcaraz the last 2 times they met. But Holger Rune is a really talented guy. He could potentially do some damage. You've got Andrei Rublev in the top 10, always plays pretty well at New York. There are other guys. You know, I think Francis trying to back up his semifinal performance will be a really interesting watch for fans. If he gets rolling again, who knows? Maybe he can take it another step. Then you've got exciting players like Spain's Alejandro Davidovich Fokina, who tends to play well at the U.S. Open, Hubert Hurkacz of Poland. These guys, I don't think I'm pegging them to really make the final even, but, you know, potential quarterfinals and really exciting players that, you know, could maybe do a career best performance here. Lots of names for sure on the men's side as well.
Yeah, lots of names, sure. Like, another question I'm curious on here, like, do you have a sleeper in mind, like somebody who's the public is not talking about enough? You like to go really deep on either side, the men's or the women's?
How deep would you say? Semis?
I'd say quarters.
Quarters, okay. Well, you know, I think Zverev is actually starting to find his form. Last year at Roland Garros, he hurt his ankle against Nadal, and I think he tore like 3 ligaments, instantly had to have surgery, was gone for the rest of the season, started playing again this year, but just didn't have it yet. He just wasn't comfortable moving and playing his brand of tennis. Last couple months, you've seen him do quite well. He moved up another 5 spots in the ranking to number 12 this week, and I think he's definitely a guy who could potentially go semifinals, even make a final. I don't think a lot of people are thinking about him right now, and he's extremely talented and like looks like he's finding his best form again. Women's side, Mira Andreeva, the 16-year-old who's broken out at Roland Garros and at Wimbledon. She made her debut at both events this summer, reached the 3rd round at Roland Garros, the 4th round at Wimbledon. She could potentially make a big splash at the U.S. Open. Only 16 and hasn't played a lot on the tour level. She was playing juniors at the Australian Open this season in January. Already, she's a top player and really everybody's going to be watching her. I wouldn't be surprised if she reached the quarterfinal.
That's certainly a lot of fun to see here. If you had to make your pick right now, like obviously the draw can complicate things. I know who gets a rougher path here. Who would you pick on each side to win?
Yeah, definitely good to preface it by saying it's always better to look at the draw when you make your picks because things change a lot with matchups and stuff when you see the draw. But if I had to, oh man, I'd have to almost flip a coin on Djokovic and Alcaraz. I'll just say Djokovic. Just, I don't know, experience, desire. He knows he's not going to have too many more chances. I think he's getting a little bit more comfortable with facing Alcaraz. I think he could edge him in a final, though. It's a really tough call. And then on the women's side, you know, that's a tricky question. I feel like that it's not going to be easy for Iga to repeat. So maybe, you know, it's a tough call. Maybe Sabalenka wins this title. Maybe Rybakina if she's healthy. I guess if you put me on the spot, huh? Sabalenka, why not?
All right, so there you have it. Chris Oddo, thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it. If you want to follow your tennis coverage, how can they do that?
Oh, I'll be writing for usopen.org and tennisnow.com, and you can always find me on Twitter at @thefanchild, even though it's not called Twitter anymore. It's called X, I guess. But I'll be there.
Yeah, we've been calling it Twitter X on my other podcast, so that's sort of what I've been going with.
It's so funny, right? Yeah. You just tweet. I saw your tweet the other day. No, it's not a tweet anymore. Anyway, things change, but they also stay the same.
They do stay the same, Chris. Thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Take care.